Okay, great, great, excellent. So thank you very much to the hosts, and it's really a privilege to listen to such distinguished perspectives. I'll just get into the point. I want to discuss just 3 points. Number one is the fact that India is an important country in this region. It does have a certain amount of influence. It has built very smartly a web of relationships post Cold War in the last 3 decades. Amazing by the standards of a country that was a closed country for most of the years after its independence. And after the Cold War, it went about very smartly building its international presence, and it did that job very, very well. So in the last 3 decades, we have a country like India, the size of India, that has established itself as a market, as a diplomatic power, as a military power. So these things are a given. And although I don't want to do the unsavory task of praising the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but I will give him the credit for some very interesting diplomacy over the past 5 years. He traveled around the world. He made certain inroads, specifically in the Gulf region, in the Middle East. He exploited opportunities. So he's been good at that. And he also established a relationship with the current leadership of China, with President Xi Jinping and other world leaders. So, but despite having done all of this, and despite all of this presence that India has in today's world, and its claim and to a permanent seat on the UN Security Council and to a bigger role in international affairs, despite all of this, we see something very interesting when it comes to Kashmir, and that is, despite all the actions and all the hard work and all the diplomacy and all the military and the legal actions and the constitutional actions that India has taken in Kashmir, we still see a certain reluctance on the part of India's own major partners and the international community at large to fully endorse what India is doing in Kashmir. And this is a very important point in my view. Why? Because it shows that despite all that web of dependencies and interests that India has developed over the past 3 decades, we still see a certain reticence and reluctance on the part of the international community to fully go along with whatever India is doing in Kashmir. And this provides a huge, although it's a small window of opportunity, but it is a very important opportunity for Kashmiris themselves, for Pakistan, for human rights activists, for people who would like to see peace in this region of South Asia to work, although it does not look very promising. So I notice, I do take note of the fact that since August 5, for example, not a single country in the world has really come forward and accepted India's annexation and all these steps, the legal and the constitutional steps that India has taken after August 5. Nobody probably has opposed it very openly and bluntly, but nobody has also openly accepted it. In fact, we have, for the first time, I think, in several decades, a US administration that is, at least thrice, has offered a mediation, which implies, of course, that this is an internationally disputed a conflict. It's an international dispute. It's not what India says, an internal matter of India. And we hear from many diplomats from many countries, from Pakistan, certainly the Indians themselves and others, that India has worked very hard, really, to convince many countries, including to discuss Kashmir twice, as they've done over the past, since August 5, after August 5, because it's an internal matter. But none of the P5 countries actually vetoed that discussion, although not much has come out of those discussions. So there is a realization at the international level about Kashmir. There's a concern, and there is a small amount of defeat for India's long-standing intransigent position of not moving forward with anything on Kashmir toward a resolution of this conflict. So realizing this fact, I'd just like to move to two more points and conclude with those 2 points. Having understood the fact that India has failed, frankly, despite all its might and despite its clout, economic, diplomatic, and military, having failed to really secure a complete and final acknowledgement from the international community of its actions in Kashmir, what are we left with really to move forward toward a resolution? And we seem to, frankly, be moving away from a conflict resolution than really moving forward. And now, of course, we have this development with China and India, and I think all of us here in this region are trying to understand what it means, because we have questions, and I have no doubt, obviously, of the fact that Pakistan and China are very close and close allies, and there must be some level of understanding politically as to where these things are going and how the clash between or the positions of China and India on Ladakh would impact the wider conflict. But we as journalists and as activists and as human rights defenders, all we have are questions and analysis. And one of the questions that everybody is asking is, would this conflict now that has developed between China and India would help actually resolve this conflict, or would further complicate it? It's a very difficult question. I don't have the answer for. I'm sure a lot of people are analyzing it. There are different perspectives. So China's entry, as Ambassador Arif Kamal mentioned, I don't know. I'm not sure whether it has complicated this conflict or would actually help in pushing it toward a conflict resolution, and that's what we hope. And the last point where I'd like to conclude is actually the elephant in the room. With all the, I would say, welcome changes in international community's position on Kashmir, we see a renewed interest by the international media. We see hearings in the US Congress, in the British Parliament, in the French Parliament, in the EU. We see people who never talked about Kashmir. They used to run away when the K word was mentioned. We see a change in their positions. But despite all of these positive things, it really comes down to convincing India to move forward. And this is the larger country in this region. It can show the magnanimity if it wants to move forward. It can expend the political capital necessary to give concessions to resolve this conflict, but it is not ready to do that. And I think this is something that we in Pakistan also need to begin to debate: how to convince, how to build up the Indian public opinion for a conflict resolution and away from this perpetual, endless conflict between Pakistan and India, which could prove disastrous for both of these countries, but mainly it is already proving disastrous for the people of Kashmir. So this is a huge question. Obviously, I don't have the answer for, but all we can do is raise questions. And I leave with this point: how can Pakistan, and it's a matter for Pakistan, but it's also a matter for the UN, and it's also a matter for the major powers, how to really get India and build this sort of stakeholders within India and convince the Indian public opinion to exert the kind of pressure necessary on its political elite for a conflict resolution. And obviously there will have to be concessions by all parties for that conflict, but we can't even talk about concessions right now because we don't see a willingness by the key party, which is India. And I often tell my friends who, when they discuss Pakistan and India, they often put these two countries at an equal level. And I say you cannot equate between these two countries. Frankly, even if Pakistan wants to give concessions, and even if Pakistan wants to resolve this conflict, Pakistan cannot do it if India is not willing and ready to do it. And it is actually move forward, even if Pakistan is unwilling, theoretically. It is India that can move forward toward a conflict resolution, and we do not see that now from the Indian government or the political elite, and also from the Indian public opinion, unfortunately. And I think this is the crux of the matter. Thank you very much, Saddam.